Daniel, this is where the rubber hits the road, right? We hear about the economy reopening. We look at that stock market and see the amazing recovery that it has had. But that's not the reality for these people. That woman who said, if I don't get something, I lose my apartment. That is the reality for tens of millions of Americans.
Yeah, that really is the reality, right? As I went through the line and I talked to a lot of these people, you heard kind of the same sort of story over and over again about how difficult it is to make ends meet right now. These are people who filed unemployment claims in March, in April, in May. And so it's been weeks and weeks without them getting any money. So I talked to people who they've been skipping meals to make sure that their partner can have a meal. I talked to one man who he actually made it through the line. He got his money, but he had been evicted from one apartment and had to move to a second apartment. There are other people who there is a ban on evictions right now in Kentucky, but even with that ban on evictions, people are still being harassed by their landlords. They're still being told that they have to pay their bills. And so there are a lot of people who are really, really struggling right now.
I mean, that's amazing. People skipping meals in the richest country in the world. And the governor, Andy Beshear, says he's putting more resources behind this. But he sort of pointed out that this, as he said, is not a bug. It's a feature of a system that is designed to make it difficult. We make people jump through hoops in this country to get things like unemployment or Medicaid.
Yeah, and so he's really referencing the fact that under the CARES Act, they kind of expanded the people who are eligible for unemployment, people who are independent contractors or people who are self-employed, people who may work at a church daycare, that sort of thing. And so when they go through this antiquated unemployment system in Kentucky, there are a lot of prompts that are basically saying, no, you're not eligible, no, you're not eligible, no, you're not eligible. And so they have to have this sort of tier of workers who can manually override that system to help resolve a lot of these problems, right? So we've had over 800,000 people file first-time unemployment claims in Kentucky, and about 95% of those claims have been processed. But that still leaves these thousands of people who have these sort of trickier claims and haven't been able to talk to a human being to get those tricky claims resolved, and they only have a limited staff who can actually do this. And so that's what we're seeing is a lot of people who, there was one lady who showed me 9 different phone numbers she has called because she can't get through to a human because of this system.